She is president of consulting firm Brilliant Aging. She helps companies support customers' well-being with vital strategies. She also directed the Kaiser Institute on Aging for 3 years and serves on both the International Council of Aging, Active Aging, and American Senior Fitness Association boards. Kay has authored 2 books, several chapters, and scores of journal articles on aging well, and her book Exercise and Wellness for Older Adults was recently translated into Chinese, opening a whole new world of possibilities in that country. And she can be reached at her website, which is www.kayvannorman.com. So please join me in welcoming Kay here.
Well, thank you very much. That all sounds so good. Gosh, you'd think that if I can accomplish a few of those things, I might be able to keep better track of my purse, you know. Maria was so kind to take me to dinner last night, and we got back to the hotel, and I went to reach for my key, and I thought, I have no idea where my purse is, and so I left it at the restaurant. And so thankfully we were only across the street at the restaurant, so I went over there, and they had seated, my purse was sitting there on the chair, but they had seated somebody right in the table next to it. And so, you know, I kind of gingerly went in, and the girl looks at me, and I said, well, I just need my purse, and I started to reach forward, and she looked at me so strange and kind of backed off, and I realized her purse was hanging on her chair, and she thought I was reaching for her purse for that 1 second, and just that feeling of, you know, what a dork, you know, what a dork. So anyway, I should have like a little resume with me that I can hand out and say, I'm not always a dork, I can actually do something right. Okay, before I start here, I'll introduce you to Dancer, who is on the photo in the brochure as well, because a lot of people ask me about her. She is my favorite riding mare. She is 30 years old this year. I've had her since she was a year old, and so she's very, very special to me. And I'm not sure what it means exactly that I work in geriatrics and I have one of the oldest horses around. But it probably means something, I don't know. So what I'm going to talk about is barriers, unseen barriers to healthy aging. And I think we can all agree that most people, if they're quizzed about it, have a basic idea of what they should be doing to live healthy, to age well, those kinds of things. And so, but what is it that keeps people from taking advantage of the strategies before them to live well, to age well? And so when I first started out, I was teaching dance education at Montana State University. I did that for about 10 years. And then I took over the Young at Heart program at MSU, which was an exercise program for older adults based at the university. And so that's when I really started working on healthy aging issues. And so I really started looking at barriers to physical activity participation. And I was doing quite a bit of consulting in senior living. And I was finding that they had all kinds of great programs, and yet there seemed to be a lack of interest and a lack of participation. So I started out with that, and that whole build it and they will come mentality seemed to be prevalent. Or prevalent? It's prevalent, isn't it? And what I found interesting, I was at an NCOE, National Council on Aging meeting one time in DC, and Administration on Aging officials and all these people were there talking about spending millions and millions of dollars to make physical activity more accessible to older adults. And they were talking about all the barriers like transportation and cost and qualified instructors and accessibility, all that. And I finally stood up and said, well, now if those are the true barriers, shouldn't we have 100% participation in senior housing where none of those barriers exist? It doesn't cost anything. There's no transportation. There's, you know, none of those barriers exist, and yet it's about 20%. 20%. And so that really got me thinking very hard about what are those other layers? What are those barriers that are keeping people from becoming involved? And so then I started working a lot on whole person wellness, you know, the 6 or 7 dimensions of wellness, whatever, depends on what model you follow. And had good success with that, and there have been more participation. And yet still, if you got 30 to 35% people involved in your programs, you're flipping cartwheels. You're thinking you're doing a great job. So what's going on with that other 65%? So we started looking at the stages of change model. And how many of you are familiar with the stages of change model? Pre-contemplation, contemplation. It's kind of, It's a whole behavior change theory. It's been a model for a long time. And you do have a handout that would be in your, is it a memory stick or what is it that you have? Anyway, there is a handout that I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about stages of change, but I did give you the information. Basically, saying there's only about 20% of people are in the action stage of change at any one time. So you have pre-contemplators who are not even thinking about making a change. So if you're talking about physical activity, it's not even on their radar. Now they're not interested. And then you have your contemplators who, yeah, I've heard about it and I probably should do something, and so I'm sort of, contemplating it, but I'm really not going to take action yet. A lot of us are in that phase, I think. And then there's your preparation stage. Yeah, I really need to do this, and I'm going to start looking around, finding out what's available, what it costs, all of those kinds of things. It isn't until you've passed all through those stages that you even come into the action stage, where you're going to actually take action to either join a class or exercise with a DVD or do something like that. But if you look at, especially in senior living, if you look at all of the programming, what phase is it programming for? Action. There's all these programs that people have to take action in order to become involved in. And so it's just like we keep trying the same thing over and over and over and expecting a different outcome, and there's no different outcome. So that's a big piece of it. And I think the thing that's really exciting for healthcare professionals and nurses is that you can be a really big part of helping move people from those pre-contemplation, contemplation into action, because you're the ones that you can say, you really need to do this. This is, here's the health status that I would really like to see change, and here's something you can do. It's not like a magic wand that you wave, but it's that one more little piece of information that might move them one step closer into action. And so that's exciting. And so as I went through this process over the I've been working in healthy aging for about 22 years now. And as I started working through this process, it became very clear that there's very serious limitations in this whole customer-based approach. We're going to provide something, and then we're going to hope like heck that people come and take advantage of it. And so what I really evolved into doing is really creating that culture of well-being. How do you actually create a culture of well-being, not only in the physical environment, but in the emotional environment of a person? What is it that encourages somebody? What is it that helps that person take advantage of all the opportunities there are for them to improve their well-being? So participation supports change, but the culture itself is built on attitudes, expectations, belief in possibilities, and that's regardless of challenges. And I want to share this with you. This is my friend Aldo. He's one of my favorite riding buddies. He's 84 years old. And last June, he fell off the top of a haystack and broke his back. And of course, it's like, oh no, not that. But when I went in to see him at the hospital, I knew immediately that he was going to do okay, because he was ordering the nurses around like crazy, telling them what he wanted, how he wanted it done, all those kinds of things. He never once ever said to me, now I'm done, I can't ride anymore. He was mad as he could be that he was going to miss that summer of riding. That was his mindset. I'm so mad at myself that I'm going to miss this summer of riding. Not one time did he think he was not going to be riding. That's huge. When you start thinking about that mindset, that belief system, and then he got out of the hospital, I think 4 days before 4th of July. And he called everybody the day he got out and said, I'm having a 4th of July picnic, everybody come over. We're like, really? Okay, and so we had a big picnic at his house on the 4th of July. And so again, very clearly stating to everybody, I'm not out of the picture. I'm engaged, I'm not stepping back. And honest to gosh truth, 7 weeks to the day after he broke his back, he called me and says, the doctor cleared me to ride. And I said, he did not. And he said he did. And so his son got on the phone and we're talking. He said, yeah, he said, as long as he had a reliable horse and didn't get too crazy, he could ride. 7 weeks to the day. And he wanted me to take him up in the mountains. And so we went up for an hour. And that was all he could handle. He was happy to do that. But by the end of the summer, we did a 28-mile loop in Yellowstone Park, and he was totally fine. I was exhausted. He was fine. But again, so much of it is that resilience piece. And for me, as I go through this, the healthy aging, all of the stuff around it, that is huge. That is central. If we can start really looking at what are the elements, what are the building blocks of resilience, and we start consciously focusing on the building blocks of resilience, self-efficacy, self-esteem, optimism, all of those kinds of things, positive attitude, all of that stuff. If we can start consciously working on building those up, then we can start helping people build resilience. Because some people are just born with it, it seems like, but a lot of people aren't. We have to help them through. And so you look at Eldo and you say, oh, he's unusual because he's healthy and he's active and all this kind of stuff. And then you have Harriet. And Harriet is actually, this is my son when he was about 4 years old. He'd be mortified because he's now 18 and graduating from high school. But the thing is, Harriet took care of Cole from the time he was about 6 months old until he went to kindergarten. And she was 80 years old when she started. And she had severe back problems, osteoporosis, spinal kyphosis, the whole works. And so when I was running the Young at Heart program at the time, and I had put in the newsletter that I was looking for some child care. And so when she contacted me, I was a little taken back, and I thought, well, gee, can you do this? And we had a really deep conversation. I said, you know, I don't want you to get hurt. I don't want Cole to get hurt. You know, let's figure this out. And she said to me, oh, I've had a bad back my whole life. She had scoliosis and all kinds of things. She said, when I was raising my kids, I'd have to be bedridden sometimes for a few days, but it never occurred to me to not get back up and get going again. And so in her mindset, why couldn't she take care of a child? She'd done it before when she had a bad back. And so we started looking at it as problem solving. And so we put the crib up against the bed and put the side part way down so that when he woke up, he could crawl onto the mattress and down he'd go. And we just figured it out. Most wonderful experience. And I was, you know, first a little bit worrying that she wouldn't be able to do it for very long. And yet, so there was actually another woman who was in her early 60s who was also helping out. And what ended up happening is that woman was always sick and always having problems, and Harriet was totally fine. And so we finally just had Harriet do it full time, and she did it that entire 6 years before I went. So it was wonderful. And what was really neat about it is the relationship that they built. And so this is my son at his last wrestling match, varsity wrestling match at the high school. And Harriet was absolutely 100% determined to go. And so I got her to the wrestling match, and it was interesting. I don't know if you've ever been to wrestling matches, but they go on until you think you're going to be 12 years older after it's done. And, and there's also it's just matched all the way to the edge, and there's like backpacks and just things all over. Well, she can't see very well, so she wanted to get right over to where his match was going to be. So here she takes her walker, and we just head across the mats and, you know, moving stuff aside, and everybody's just clear out of the way. But what's so wonderful about it is that even though she has all these health concerns, I mean, she is very, you know, very disabled in many ways, she is just, keeps on going. She has a very high sense of well-being. And so what is well-being? We have to start identifying what is that. Is it just people who seem to go through life and be able to water ski when they're 100? Or is it people like Harriet who have some very serious health concerns but still are living well in spite of it? And so I've got to say, she always comes over to our house for Christmas and all those kinds of things. And last Christmas, it was so neat to see, you know, she was getting ready to leave, and she's sitting on the bench, and Cole was down on his hands and knees helping her get her boots on and stuff. And I thought, oh, isn't that nice that he's willing to do that? And I think he developed that empathy early on for her. And sometimes when he was little, I'd come in to pick him up, and she'd be laying flat on the couch on a heating pad, and he'd be sitting there with a book upside down reading her a story, you know, trying to. But he learned early on that empathy, that, you know, it's not all about me. So it's one of the most wonderful things, I think, in his life. So this is where I came to the mindset that age itself has less to do with who a person is and what they're capable than almost any other single factor. And yet, it's almost like Velcro. People attach all kinds of other stuff to it. And so much of that is sort of this mindset of we're always going to decline into a dependence as we age. And we know that that's not true. We know it's very common, but I think we're really stuck in that mindset. So the prevailing attitude, age is equal to decline until dependence and death, i.e. it's normal to become physically dependent, cognitively impaired. It's normal to disengage and retreat from life, to be depressed. Injury with vigorous activity is due to age, and illness is due to age. That's the prevailing attitude. But what I would like to point out is that there's a huge difference between what's common and predictable and what's normal. And I think we've made an error in judgment there. Just as in say, disadvantaged ghetto areas, it's very common and predictable for young boys to get in trouble with drugs and violence and all those kinds of things. But there's nothing normal about it. It's very common, very predictable, but it's not what you call normal. So you start looking at other possibilities in aging. I don't know if any of you read the National Geographic deal on the secrets of life, longer life and all those kinds of things. The thing that I find really interesting is if you look at the woman on the right-hand side, she's in, I think, 89 or something like that, crouched down, picking seaweed, in the rocks and all that stuff. Again, because that's what she's done her entire life, it never occurs to her that that's not something that she could do at that age. It's the whole blue zone studies, if you're familiar. How many of you are familiar with the blue zone studies? Anybody? I really recommend you try to find that. It's called the blue zones, and it really is talking about all these areas around the world that seem to have this kind of hot pockets of people 100 plus, living very vigorous lives in 80 plus, that kind of stuff. And the thing that's interesting about it is people are always looking for, what's the perfect thing for me to eat? That's going to make me stay well. What about the perfect exercise? That's going to make me stay well. And there's all these things that we try to attach all these hopes to. And really what it comes down to is, again, like we all know and you know, it's all the whole picture. But what rises to the top above anything else is engagement in life, purpose in life, social connectedness with family, friends, that kind of thing. Those are the things that rose to the top regardless of what else was going on, regardless of what they were eating. Far and away, every one of them was at least moderately physically active. But what rose to the top was that connectedness, that sense of purpose, the value. So I have to ask the question, what if this is Frank, 100 years old, watches every day in California? What if, I have to ask the question, what if we all believe not only in a different possibility, but a different probability? How differently would we go about things if we believed in that this was the probability, not just some remote possibility that this guy is just the luckiest guy on earth? I mean, you all know that the 100 plus is the fastest growing population segment. I mean, it's 80 plus is the fastest growing, but within that segment, 100 plus is the fastest growing within that 80 plus category. And so, we're blessed with this much longer possibility for a lifespan, and so we really have to get to what are we going to do to make sure it's healthy. And so what happens, why did we get to the point we're at now? Why do we have this perception in our culture that old equals bad, young equals good? Look at all the anti-aging, defy aging, all that kind of stuff. It's like, the last thing you ever want to do is age. And which is silly because the alternative is much worse. So, but, in our culture, older adults are, by and large, defined by negative stereotypes. And I put this Harrison Ford reminder here because I had to tell you the story. I was watching Jay Leno one night, and I heard him talking about coming through Bozeman with his girlfriend at the time, Callista Flockhart, whoever, and her little boy. And he talked about how he stopped at the grocery store, to get diapers for the little boy. Goes in, a teenage kid behind the counter, he said, can you tell me the aisle for diapers? So the guy says 5A. He goes, yeah, it depends. And so here's Harrison Ford without all of the, all the Hollywood hoopla behind him, and swashbuckling Harrison Ford is now just some old guy who probably needs Depends. And that is how far we've gotten down that negative stereotype thing. I mean, this 18-year-old kid behind the counter, I mean, if you're over 20, you're old, so how did we get here? How did we get to this point? There's a very solid historical basis for ageism, and one of the first things is the gerontology research that was done years and years ago was a totally skewed sample. Where do you think they went to study older adults? The nursing homes. That would be like going to the local hospital and surveying all the people who were in the hospital and then coming out with community health statistics based on the people that were in the hospital. And so that's what it was based on. And so suddenly, they took that information and then they'd start driving social policy around that information. And the mindset was that when you get old, you're going to, you're going to fall apart and you're going to need all this support and all this help and you're very vulnerable, and there's that whole social mindset that was built around that. Social Security, when it came on board, it really was to move the older people out of the jobs so the young men coming back from the service had jobs. And so they promised to give these people a small stipend to live on, and so it was kind of the patriotic duty to move out of those jobs so the young people would move in. And so now it was a small stipend. They didn't really expect people to live very long after they retired anyway. And so those people started having all kinds of financial issues as well because now they're out of the job market. They're living longer than they thought they were going to live, and so they're trying to live on this tiny little stipend. So now comes Medicare, because they're trying to help people. And Medicare's entire focus is on illness. And so again, you're building these little layers that are talking about how older adults are past the ability to contribute. Again, you're retiring. If you look at an old dictionary from the 30s on if you look up the word retire, it says to put out of service, to make useless. It's like, ouch. Horrible word, horrible word. So again, that whole thing, that whole idea that they're past the ability to contribute, they're past the ability to handle life challenges, vulnerable. There's this whole sort of message that's been packaged and sold to everyone for years and years and years and years. Then along comes the Industrial Revolution. Well, here it is. The automation was embraced by the generation because they had spent so much time working hard physically just to get by in a day. And so all this automation was really embraced. And so when you started out, you might have had a push lawnmower, and then when you got to be a little more successful, you could afford to buy a power lawnmower that sort of propelled itself, and then when you got more successful, you could get a ride-on lawnmower, and then when you got more successful, you just hire someone else to do all that stuff. And so there became this link between success and less physical exertion. And the idea that physical exertion is a good thing sort of fell off to the wayside. And so now you've got less and less physical activity as people are aging, and there was a sharp decline in functional status. And so it kind of reinforced that concept that as you get older, you're going to lose functional status and blah, blah, blah. So it's this whole storyline that has been developed. And so you look at the media images of aging. They're really reduced down to the extremes. So you have what they call the woofies, which are the well-off older folks. That's a marketing term they come off. And they're golfing, and they're hiking, and they're, traveling with their grandkids and all that. That's the marketing group. And then there's the frail dependent individuals. And that's when you're seeing all the ads on, the Lifeline and the Depends and all of those kinds of things, all the Medicare reimbursable kinds of things. And so you have this very dramatic extremes, and there's almost nothing in between. If you think about marketing on TV, there's almost nothing in between, which is where the vast majority of older adults exist. This is the vast majority where all of us exist, is somewhere in between those extremes. And I mean, if you look at some common sayings, one of the things that I do in speeches a lot is I'll have people finish these common sayings. A penny saved is? A penny earned. Waste not? Want not. I've fallen and I can't get up. I can say those phrases, and if I'm with a younger crowd, a lot of them won't get the waste not, want not, and all that stuff, but every single audience member of any age can get the I've fallen and I can't get up. That's a pretty powerful image, and it's a pretty, emotion-centered image. And so again, we have all this misinformation that aging causes all the decline, and we've forgotten that it's really disuse and disease. Because age in and of itself, there are declines in the biological declines as you age, but they're minuscule compared to the declines associated with lifestyle. Minuscule. And that's what we have to get in our own brains for ourselves, and that's what we have to help patients with as well. So, beliefs are based on expectations and social constructs. Stereotypes of this negative stereotypes of aging are internalized long before they're personally relevant. So you're internalizing that stuff as a young kid, as a young adult. You're internalizing the stereotypes, and then when they become personally relevant, suddenly it's just they are in your face, and they're really hard. It's really hard to overcome it when it's so internalized. So again, what's that lens? I'm 25 and my knee hurts. Well, I hurt it. I injured it. Take some Advil, put ice on it, keep going. I'm 40 and my knee hurts. Oh my God, I'm 40 now. My knee hurts. I bet I've got arthritis. I'm done for. I'm 60 and forget where I put my keys. Oh, it's Alzheimer's moment. I'm 10 and forget my backpack. Whatever. I mean, you think about it. When my kids were going to school, I'd remind them 3 times in 15 minutes to take their backpack, shoes, and homework, and they'd forget at least one. So should I have them taken in for memory impairment? I mean, can you imagine that conversation? Doctor, he keeps forgetting his gym shoes. But if you think about it, we start attaching, again, like Velcro, different things to something that's been going on your entire life. Can you honestly tell me, the mothers in here, when you were running around trying to raise your kids and doing that stuff, that you weren't forgetful, that you didn't leave your purse here and your shoes over there, and you probably showed up somewhere in your nightgown? I mean, it just has been happening our whole lives, but we end up attaching something different to it. And so that's what I really work hard to try to overcome. It's like, let's stop making that the default mechanism. And certainly that things happen, but let's stop making that the default mechanism and really consciously think about what we are thinking, saying, and believing about aging. So how old do you think you'll live? How many of you believe you're going to live past the age of 65? Pretty much at, well, yeah. How about 75? Okay, how about 85? Ooh, a few. How about 95? 105 or 100. Okay, a few people still believe they're going to be around 100. I'm fascinated by this because I have asked this question all over, and everybody has kind of an idea of how long they think they're going to live. It's really kind of interesting. And so you might base that on how old your grandparents got or your parents got, or there's all kinds of things, but you might not even know what you have based that on. Where will you live? I mean, start thinking about this thing. How many of you are going to plan to live in a senior living community? A couple? 2? That's interesting. Yeah. I ask that all the time at senior living conferences with all the senior living executives and all that stuff, and it's the same thing. About 2 people raise their hand. That gives us a clue about some things here. So again, thinking to yourself, what will you be doing? Will you be healthy and physically independent? How many people believe they're going to be healthy and physically independent? Ooh, about half? Interesting. Do you feel like you require assistance with activities of daily living? How many think you'll require At what age? Oh, let's say 85. At 85. Okay. Will your mind be sharp? Absolutely, yeah. Is it sharp now? Will you be socially connected? Yeah. I mean, these are the important things. I mean, sometimes you don't think about that stuff. Now, here's the other questions. What are you doing on a daily basis to ensure the outcome? So let's look at this. Okay, I want everybody to stand up for me, please, for a minute. Doesn't that feel good to stand up? I know, I always find it really interesting. You go to all these conferences on healthy aging and healthy this and healthy that, and what do? You sit for 3 days. And that research that came out that said that sitting is like the new smoking. Did you read that research? That it really has such dramatic health consequences, very detrimental consequences for just sitting all day. Yikes. So that's why we sit at healthy aging conferences all day. Okay. I'm going to have you answer yes or no to these questions. Do you expect to be active through your full lifespan? If you said no, please sit down. Do you think your life is mostly good? Yes. If you said no, please sit down. Have you laughed out loud in the last 24 hours? Yes. If you said no, please sit down. Do you believe you have the ability to prevent loss of physical function as you age? If you said no, please sit down. Are you at least as strong and agile today as you were 2 years ago? Yes. If you said no, please sit down. Be honest with yourself. Are you physically active, intentionally physically active, for at least 30 minutes each day? Yes. If you said no, please sit down. Do you expect to be stronger and more agile 2 years from now than you are today? If you said no, please sit down. Okay, do you strength train at least twice a week or regularly lift heavy to moderate object or moderately? If you said no, please sit down. Do you believe you have the ability to prevent loss of mental function as you age? If you said no, please sit down. Do you challenge your mind with activities requiring complex thought and analysis at least 3 times a week? Probably as nurses you do. If you said no, please sit down. Okay, here's the biggie. In the past 2 weeks, have you made a joking or serious reference to your physical performance being diminished by age? If you said yes, please sit down. In the past 2 weeks, have you made a joking or serious reference to having a senior moment when forgetting a name or fact? If you said yes, please sit down. So we have a couple of people standing up. Thank you all very much. Okay. So now what this is intended to tell you is what you're thinking about aging, also what you're saying about aging, and what you're doing about aging. So if you say to yourself, oh, I know I can prevent loss of physical function as I age, yeah, absolutely. And then you're not strength training at least twice a week, I guarantee you are going to lose function. The research is very, very clear that after about age 30, you lose 1 to 1.5% of strength every year after age 30. Now that doesn't sound a lot until you do the math. That's about 60% by the time you're, what, 60? 45% by the time you're 75? 60% by the time you're 80? I mean, so if you think about this for a minute. If I'm losing that much strength, and this is even for elite athletes, folks, they just start at such a higher level that as they decline slightly, they're never going to fall below the level of functional ability. But if you're starting at this really low level, as you start to go down, pretty soon you fall below that threshold. And so, I mean, it's very clear. I lost my train of thought. I was going to make such a good point, too. Say that again? CRS. Can't remember stuff. That's right. So anyway, you have to be strength training. You have to do it if you want to retain function. Because if you don't, you are going to be losing muscle mass, you are going to be losing strength. Okay? And so again, if you're saying that, oh yeah, I don't believe in ageism, I think, you know, our mind stays sharp and all that stuff, but every time you forget something, you say, I've had a senior moment. These are cues that your mind is giving you that you're believing. I had a conversation at a party one time, and I'm a real hoot at a cocktail party, I can tell you. But it's these people that I knew, they were probably in their late 40s or so, and they were runners and really active and whatnot. And we were talking about building a house, and they were saying, yeah, we're going to build a new house because when we get old and can't climb stairs. And I'm like, I said, what do you mean when you get old and can't climb stairs? Well, you know, stuff happens, you lose this and you lose that. And I'm all for universal design. I mean, that's a great idea. But we aren't, you aren't planning your life when you're young around the possibility that you're not going to be able to get up the stairs. I mean, any one of us could get hit by a bus tomorrow and not be able to get up the stairs, but we're not planning our life around it. And so what is that saying? Because there's, the whole psychological piece is so powerful. The mind is so powerful to impact your world. That if you're thinking along the lines of, well, when I get old, I'm not going to be able to do this and I'm not going to be able to do that, you're right. Because you've already decided what you are and are not capable of. So there's a disconnect. To be with you, I'd climb across desert and swim ocean. How about coming to dinner tonight? Sorry, my horse is lame, I'd have to walk. So there's that disconnect between what people say they want and what they're willing to do to get it. So ask yourself, do your current habits support your desired outcomes? What are you really doing on a daily basis to support full life vitality? And I ask this question for you personally, and I ask you to ask this question of your patients as well, in a very tactful manner, of course, befitting to your profession. But again, it's what are we doing? Did you, and this is another thing I find really interesting, when people are surveyed to ask if they're physically active. Oh yeah, I'm regularly physically active. And then you say to them, did you strength train this week? Well, no. Did you go out and walk for 30 minutes intentionally? No. Did you stretch? Did you, no. And so what are they counting? So, again, it's perception about what you think you're doing or what you know you should be doing, what you're actually doing. So you ask yourself these very pointed questions. Did you endurance train this week? Did you strength train this week? Do you practice balance on one foot ever? Do your choices help you maintain a healthy weight? What about social connections? Are you actively staying connected with others? Or are you just sitting at home wondering why nobody calls you? Or, it's too much of trouble to get out tonight, so you're just not going to go because it's easier to sit home and watch TV. I mean, so again, it's all those everyday choices. It's not the big splashy things that make all the difference. It's the every single day choices, day in and day out. Intellectual curiosity, spirituality, vocational engagement, all of those things. So you have to ask yourself, are you missing the boat? Honestly, I feel like that all the time. Oh, crap, was that today? Yeah. So most of us go around in the world and you're worried about the scary things, the heart disease and cancer and stroke and all these what ifs, when the whole time you're running around with scissors, going to stab yourself in the eye. I mean, it's not those things so much as the everyday things that we can control. Yeah, stuff happens. That is out of your control, but the everyday lifestyle factors are in your control. Habitual patterns of behavior, habitual thoughts. I had to work so hard when I started really researching the whole ageism thing. I can tell you how hard I had to work to remove all of that language from my brain and my language. I had to work really hard. It's and I really challenge you for the next week, take note of how many times you hear somebody make a reference to, losing function as they age, losing mental function as they age, the senior moment, all those things. Take note of it on TV, how many times you receive a message, age equals decline. Just take note, you'll be shocked. at how many messages you receive every single day telling you that you're doomed as you age. So ageism, that's age-based discrimination. It's both that internal messages that you receive and internalize, and it's also external. And they anchor your self-image in decline. Unless you consciously work to overcome it, unless you consciously focus on it, look at it, and choose to reject it, it can anchor you in that message of decline. Ageism makes age discrimination socially acceptable. If you think about it. Mandatory retirement. I put ranger there because not long ago in Bozeman there was an article about a woman who was a national park ranger. You know, they wear the guns and the whole works. And apparently there's some sort of a national regulation that after age 55 you can no longer carry a firearm. So, yeah, I mean, it's really bizarre. And so for some reason it's like when you're 54 and 364 days you are responsible enough to hold a firearm, but when you become 55 you're suddenly going to wave it around wildly and, you know, shoot. It's like, what is that? I mean, what is that about? But again, it comes from those old social constructs of this is what we think. Disability services have an age cutoff. So if you're disabled as a young person, there's a whole lot of different services and resources that are made available to you. If you're disabled as an older adult, good luck with that. Here's your walker and good luck with that. Age bias in healthcare. Again, think about it for a minute. If a 35-year-old has a stroke, healthcare, family, friends, everybody rallies around the concept of getting them back into life and adaptive strategies to overcome whatever disabilities they're faced with. 75-year-old has a stroke. Again, good luck with that. Here's your strategies to cope with the disability. And there is a tremendous difference in mindset between coping and overcoming. Huge difference in mindset. And then the whole offensive characterizations and jokes. I was looking for a greeting card, and you have all these insulting ones, and I thought, well, a bunny, that can't be too bad. And I opened it up and said, I smell an old person. Happy birthday! And I thought to myself, I looked at that and I thought, if you took the word old and you replaced it with a word describing any ethnic or religious group, people would go nuts about how inappropriate it is. You would have people picketing the stores, boycotting, blah, blah, and yet there it is. And that's where we're at with age discrimination in our country, and that's how powerful and how in your face it can be. Personal beliefs and expectations absolutely impact your behaviors, which impact your outcomes. And most everybody's familiar with the placebo effect, they screen it out with, studies and everything because they found that, 30 to 60% of patients will do as well on the placebo as they do on the actual drug. That's the whole power of the mind. Mind, body, spirit techniques, they're finally, I always thought that was curious, why would you screen something out that works so well? Why wouldn't you just grab a hold of it and go, let's use this? That's inside people, let's use it. So now they are starting to use a lot of the body, mind, spirit techniques, the meditation, the music, there's all kinds of pain relief techniques that don't involve drugs. But there's also the thing called the nocebo effect. The exact same thing. Negative expectations and conditioning will do harm. They've done studies that it can create an expectation for a poor outcome. And they did these studies. I find this fascinating. They did one with an electrical current. They told people they were hooking them up to something, they were just going to run electrical current through them. And you may get a headache from it, but it should be gone within a day. Well, they didn't really run electrical current through anybody, but 2/3 of them still got a headache. I mean, that's pretty powerful. 2/3 of them still got a headache. So, and this is really amazing to me. They gave people a muscle relaxant and told them it was a stimulant. And people had a higher level of stimulant in their system than normal, even though they hadn't been given a stimulant. I mean, it's just bizarre how the body, and this is research that was in the, I can't remember, it was a New England Journal of Medicine. I mean, it was a very good research study that showed that the body can actually have biological responses to the mind. So wow, that's huge to me. That's huge. So always look at that nocebo effect of ageism. Older subjects subliminally exposed to negative stereotypes of aging will perform worse on mental and physical tests than those exposed to positive images. So again, and these are just subliminal messages. You know how they just kind of flash the little subliminal messages on the screen or whatever so that you don't even consciously get them? It's subconsciously that you pick them up. And they function worse. There was just a Times Magazine article about this same kind of thing just last week, I think it was. Did anybody read that? Anyway, there was some other study talking about any stereotyped group, if primed with the stereotype, girls are bad at math, for example, will function worse on a math quiz than if they're not primed with that. So it's very powerful. We have to be aware of it. Same thing, 20-year study, those who are more positive self-perception of aging lived an average of 7.5 years longer. They've also found that people who have a positive perception of aging tend to be more physically active. So what comes first, what comes the egg kind of a thing. Have any of you ever heard of the study, the counterclockwise study? How about the plant study where they put plants in the nursing homes? A few of you have heard of that one. And in one group they said to them, if you want a plant, come on down to the nurse's station and get it, and you'll water it and take care of it and all those kinds of things. And then other residents, they said, oh, here's a plant, don't worry about it, we'll put it in the window and we'll take care of it. Not heard of that one? Anyway, the outcomes were interesting because the people who actually went down and got the plant and took care of it had very significantly improved health outcomes. Health outcomes. Just from taking care of a plant. So again, this is powerful stuff. Counterclockwise was a study done by a Dr. Langer, and there's a book out about it, and there's actually going to be a movie starring Jennifer Aniston about it. It was done like in the 70s of all things, but it was a group of older men in a nursing home residents. They took two groups of men. One group they put into a environment where they were told to reminisce about like it was 20 years ago. And then the other group was told to live as if it was 20 years ago. Anything that was on TV was stuff from 20 years ago, the artwork, they were instructed not to talk about anything that happened after that point. So they were to live as if they were 20 years younger. And again, it was only a 2-week study, and there were some amazing outcomes in terms of the group that were living as if they were 20 years younger. They had increased flexibility, increased mental acuity. I mean, their eyesight improved. It was ridiculous. And this was a Yale University study. It's not some hack that just made up stuff. And Dr. Langer has repeated numerous ones of these studies. It just shows you how powerful that effect can be. So we really need to key into it. So that expectation of poor health. Illness and dysfunction is normal with aging. No, it's very predictable. It's very common, but it's not necessarily normal. So it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. If I think that it's normal to decline as I age, maybe I don't take action. My knee hurts, and I say, yeah, well, I'm 50 now, so what do I expect? My knee hurts. Or go in and figure out why it's hurting. Take care of it. My mother-in-law, she had been having problems with a heart valve. And they told her when she was 75 that, oh, you probably are too old to have the surgery. Well, she's 87 now. And she's been having this problem the whole time. And now she really, she thinks she's too old to have it. But it's like, again, that was a barrier for her to get the help that she needed. The mindset that I can't change this, so I might as well just accept it and forget about changing any health behaviors. If I honestly did not believe that eating healthy and being physically active and all that stuff was going to improve my well-being, if I didn't like to eat healthy, why would I? If I didn't exercise, why the heck would I? If I honestly didn't believe it was going to make any difference? Nobody would. Most people don't. And I think the biggest thing, you have people that just throw in the towel on life due to that ageist belief that, and there's a health challenge. And the story is of Lib and this gal that was in my chair exercise class in Bozeman. A wonderful woman in her mid-90s, sharp as a tack, active. She slipped and fell and broke her hip. She slipped on some water and broke her hip. And I went to see her in the hospital, and she's saying to me, "Oh, I've had a good life," and she's talking about her kids, and she's reminiscing and stuff, and I'm saying like, "Hey, Lib, when you get out of the hospital, we'll get back to doing this, we'll get back to doing that," and she kept switching the conversation back to what a good life she'd had. And finally, about the second or third time around, she reaches over and pats me on the knee, and she says, "Katie, honey, I've never known anyone my age to recover from a broken hip." And she was dead in 2 weeks. And that just broke my heart. And it just, to me, I'm thinking, good grief, she had so much life, and we have the strategies to help her get better, but in her mind, this 28-year-old fitness person isn't going to convince her that at 95 she's going to recover. I know today, if I had been able to have a 95-year-old woman who'd recovered from a broken hip that could have walked in and talked to her, I think she would have lived for another 10 years. So again, extremely powerful. We have to look into this, and we have to grab a hold of it, and we have to use it. This is an interesting thing. I saw a O magazine, and it said on the front, "Age brilliantly." And since my company is Brilliant Aging, I thought, oh, cool. And then I look at it, it says, "Everything I wanted to know, but we're too tired, forgetful, and cranky to ask." Oh, thanks a lot, What was really interesting about this for me, there was an article in there, and it was this article, the author was writing about her mother, who was in her 90s, who had broken a hip. And her mother had always been a big socialite, and had been very involved in the community and all that kind of stuff. And so the article is about this transition into this new, this new dependent, frail person kind of thing. And the thing that really bothered me is one that she said, she's finally stopped fighting the new normal. And I thought, oh, that's sad, that you would be glad that somebody had sort of given up trying to get back to their life. And the other thing that really bothered me is she said, "We've known this was coming for a long time because she's been using the walls and the furniture to get around her apartment for a while." And I'm thinking, what? She is demonstrating every symptom of physical frailty, and yet nobody did anything? If she'd had a lump in her breast, or a precancerous lesion or something like that, it would have been diagnosed, it would have been treated, and she would have moved on. And yet, the doctor never said anything to her. She never said anything to the doctor. The family never intervened. Nobody intervened. And why do you think that was? Because she was 90-ish. You just expect her to be. And the research is there. The research is there. This study was done in 1990 with frail nursing home residents. And they did a strength training, progressive resistance strength training program, increased their strength by 113% on average. This was done in 1990. There have been literally hundreds of studies proving without question that you can prevent and even reverse physical frailty. And it breaks my heart to think that physical frailty is one of the leading causes of nursing home admission. And it's preventable. And yet you're not seeing the implementation. You're not seeing, by far and large, you're not seeing the doctor saying, "Let me see you do a chair stand, how many times you can do it in 30 seconds, and let me, I don't like the looks of that, it's not as good as it was last year, I'm going to write a prescription for physical therapy." There's not that level of intervention. There's not that understanding by the individual patient themselves that strength training can improve their function. We've got to get the word out there. The nursing home or the senior living industry, you'd think that they would have this thing embraced all the way over, because it's going to reduce healthcare costs for them, it's going to reduce staff time, it's going to do all these things. And yet it's just like little pockets here and there where they'll have the strength training equipment. And unfortunately, it's usually just a way to market that we have a wellness fitness center. And so they're not even getting the best kind of equipment. They're just getting equipment. And so, wow, we got a lot of work to do on this. And so, again, it's so sad to think that these are the statistics that say, you know, the average person, community over 70, 26% can't climb one set of stairs without stopping. 31% have difficulty lifting 10 pounds. 36% have trouble walking several blocks. It's completely unnecessary. We need to intervene in this. What time is it? What time is it? What time do I get done? 1:45, 2:45, 3:15? Is that right? Okay. Because I will just keep talking forever. You guys will have to wander out, and I'll follow you down the hall. So, as healthcare professionals, as nurses, as the people who are actually in contact and know the patients better than anybody, you can have some impact on that. Challenge the notion that they can't do anything about functional decline. Have the information there. In fact, I invite you to email me if you want studies and links to all that stuff, information. I would be happy to send you the links to that stuff so that you have something in hand that you can hand to patients and say, you know, take a look at this. It's really interesting. Yes, the website, kayvannorman.com. Just KayvanNorman.com. Just all lowercase letters. Yeah, absolutely. I'd be happy to provide you with that. Validate the research findings. Again, when you hear about some research, you know, make sure that they hear about it too. Very specific information. Again, it's not just random, oh, you really should exercise information. This is something that I've used a lot of times and it's effective. And what this is a cross-section of the thigh muscle. And this is the skin on the outside, and this is the fat layer, and the white is the muscle, and then this is the bone, cross-section of the bone. And what the message about this is that the top one, you can't see the skin as well, but clearly has a lot more muscle mass than the bottom one. Now, if you say that each of these people weigh 150 pounds, the top person may only only need to recruit about maybe 60% of the muscle mass to get up out of a chair. The bottom one probably needs to recruit more like 85, 90% of the muscle mass to get out of that chair. Eventually, as that muscle mass declines and declines, pretty soon you're needing, you know, 80% of your leg strength and 50% of your arm strength to get out of that chair. And as it continues to decline, pretty soon 100% of that leg strength and 100% of that arm strength isn't getting you out of that chair. That's very specific, personally relevant information. Very relevant. You've got to start thinking of strength and power as an asset. I mean, you would protect, if you had a pile of gold sitting in your living room, you'd be protecting that like it was gold. I see that strength and power is an asset. It's an asset that you can protect and you can support. If you look at this, again, if you start high and you start to decline as you age, you may very well be in your hundreds before you ever have any problems at all with any kind of functional status. But if you start low, wow, you know, suddenly there you are below the threshold. And you see this happen all the time. You see somebody's going along pretty good and they're living independently, and then they have some kind of an accident or injury, and bam, they're below that threshold. Unless they have a really good support team that insists, unless they have the wherewithal to say, I want to get up to where I was and even better, strength-wise, that's where you start seeing the downhill spiral. So you've got to give very specific information. So again, this ageism, the nocebo effect, it's that cultural bias, the spoken and unspoken messages, the focus on deficits rather than possibilities, and that the negative storyboard is so well defined, so internalized, that it's going to take a lot of conscious thought to mount a defense against it. And so I encourage each and every one of you to start that process now for yourself, because if you do it for yourself, then you're better equipped to do it for your patients as well. Because until you start believing it yourself, it's really hard to sell it to other people. again, if you look at the things that negative beliefs about aging can do, you've got the diminishing self-efficacy. It limits your opportunities. As somebody gets their lower and lower functional status, their world becomes smaller and smaller and smaller. You may have policies and procedures in effect that diminish well-being, diminish self-efficacy. This is really a problem in senior living. They have all these policies and procedures. You know, there was a group one time, I know that there was a guy who really loved to do yard work, and he was doing yard work at the senior living, and then the volunteers came in and it's like, oh, you can't do yard work. Why not? You know? Why are we letting policies and procedures run the show? And this is the other thing. It's not only what you believe about yourself, beliefs of others impact. What other people think about you can impact your opportunities, your interactions, your outcomes. I think about this. Every single interaction, this is something I talk to a lot about in senior living. Every staff person needs to understand that every interaction you have with somebody can either support or diminish wellness goals. It leaves an impression. It leaves a halo, that interaction. Those external clues that you give to someone else about what you think about their capabilities leaves a residue. And all you have to do is think about, I put they don't think I can do anything. My mom had a stroke about 10 years ago, and for a while we had her at a community. We're taken in there a couple days a week just so she could interact with other people. And there was one woman who wanted to push this other woman in the wheelchair, and they wouldn't let her do it. And she was so frustrated because she said, they just don't think I can do anything. And so it leaves that residue. And to really understand is think of someone you feel great around. I mean, hopefully you all have somebody in your life that when you're around them you feel smart and funny and competent. Does everybody have somebody? Nobody have? Raise your hand if you have somebody like that in your life. Oh, I hope so. What about that person you feel like a total dork around? How many people have somebody that when you're around him you can't talk right, you can't walk, you can't chew gum and walk at the same time? I mean, it's just there's something about it that just makes you feel diminished. And I was thinking about this concept, and I had such an interesting experience with it. My first book had just been published, and there was a woman who was coming into Bozeman to the university and was going to give a speech there, and she was from the East Coast, and she had this big catalog company with fitness stuff, and so I was going to meet her and take her to dinner and see if she would carry my book in her catalog. So, you know, being from Montana, people think you're a major hick anyway, right? I mean, I've had people ask me if we have computers out here. I mean, that was like 10 years ago, but literally 10 years ago I had people ask me if we had computers out here, and I'm like, really? Seriously? Do you think we're still like going around in wagons and stuff? I mean, but so there's this, she's from Boston, and Boston, is anybody here from Boston? Oh my gosh! Very interesting, but definitely look at the West as being sort of Hickville. Anyway, so she's coming in. I've got it all organized. I've got my car all washed and cleaned out, and I've got my power dress on, and I'm going to pick her up and take her to dinner, and I'm just being so professional. And so I get the kids in the car, and I'm going to take them over to my friends to babysit, and I go to back out, and there's a flat tire. I'm thinking, darn it, you know, but we have another vehicle, and it wasn't as clean and blah, blah, but whatever. I'm adaptable. I can do this. Get in there. It won't start. I'm like, no way. And so the only thing I had to drive was the old farm truck. So I'm thinking, but no problem. I'm resilient, right? I'm going to go to my friend's house. I'll just ask her to borrow her car because her car is always clean. I'm cool. I'm calm. I'm collected. Get there. Can I borrow your car? Oh, absolutely. She goes, her husband had left with all the keys. Accidentally. And I'm like, oh my gosh. It was like one of those like C movies where you have the screeching sound and the object of horror. And I realized I've got to drive the farm truck to go pick up this woman. I mean, how many of you understand what a farm truck is? Montana, they understand. 1979 Chevy, you know, brown and white with mostly rust, and, you know, the peeling paint stock racks, and, you know, the seats all busted down because you're getting in and out to feed cows, and so it's broken down here, and you know, big holes in the floorboard. I mean, you're just like, oh my gosh. And so my friend starts helping me take everything out of the truck, you know, chainsaw and the I'm not kidding you. And then, you know, we're trying to get all the dirt out the big holes in the floorboard, you know, and she brings a blanket to lay it on the seat like that's really going to help. You know? So now I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I am driving to town and I'm thinking, I have got to, how am I going to ask this woman to get in this truck, you know? I mean, here I'm trying to be calm and professional and cool, and I'm more like Ellie Mae Clampett, you know, and just as I'm thinking the worst, I catch something out of the corner of my eye in the rearview mirror, and I look in the rearview mirror, and honest to God, true story, Brutus, farm dog, is in the back of the truck. Yes, so now I am going to an important business meeting in a ratty old farm track with a dog in the back. And it was just like, oh my, I mean, the farm truck, we never drive to town. When it fires up, the dog figures there's work to do or fun to be had, so he just jumped in and laid down. Now, my point of this whole thing, and I do have a point, is that if I had been going to meet somebody who I'd worked with on a national committee or, you know, I believe that thought me as a competent professional and all this stuff, I would have thought it was funny. But because I was going to meet somebody that I thought believed that I was kind of a hick and that had this sort of impression that I probably wasn't really up to the snuff, it was a whole different experience. So that's the point, the power of what other people think of you and how that impacts your interaction and your experience. We can impact that. Oh. Really important question. Yeah, so I'm going to town and I realize, okay, wait a minute now. The university is right close to this. There's this restaurant close to the university. I'll just ask her if she wants to walk over to the restaurant. No self-respecting fitness person would refuse to walk, you know, 3 blocks to a restaurant. So anyway, but then I had farm dog in town, right? And it's hot out, and so I can't put him in the cab of the truck, so I've got him in the back of the truck. Well, I go in and get her. We walk by the truck, and I'm like, you know, he knows he's supposed to stay, right? So we get over to the restaurant. They sit us right by the window. I'm like, great, now I can watch Brute Farm Dog in town. And so we're visiting along. All of a sudden, I look up, and he's gone. And I'm like, oh, no, and now I've got to excuse myself to go look for my dog. That's going to be good. But no worry, because in about 5 minutes, he was out the window like this. And so she kept saying, oh, look, someone's dog. I wonder whose dog that is. But the funniest thing was that he knew he wasn't supposed to get out of the truck, so if I'd look at him, he'd go like this. So she didn't think he was my dog. And so then it was time, you know, to leave, and I thought, okay, now the gig is up. He's going to follow me as we go out or whatever. And as fate would have it, she ran into the people she knew, and they decided to stay and have drinks, and I just skated out of there. So. But again, it's just, you know, it's just such a powerful thing. When you have somebody in your sphere of influence, and you can make them feel competent and cared for and all of those things, and that they are competent to give as well as receive, it's huge. So did she carry your book in the magazine? She did, actually, yes. Yeah, it did work out. She did carry the book. So the thing about making sure that we take age out of the equation. Think for a minute and just take age completely out of the equation. And what would be the outcomes? What would be the interaction? What would be the opportunities? And you may have to put it back in a little later, but start off by taking it out of the equation completely. Expectations play a huge role in treatment and intervention. Have any of you heard of that book, Into the Blue? It's a book about a guy in Bozeman, actually, Wayne Edsel, and he was a pilot. He was a World War II pilot, and he also liked to refurbish old planes and fly with his buddies around Bozeman and stuff. Well, he had a massive stroke, like age 75. And basically, the doctor said he's going to need nursing home care. There's nothing we can do. And the family said, no, we're going to do what we can do to help him get well. Long story short, they started working with him. The daughters took a rotation and they worked with him every single day for months and helped him regain speech and cognition and physical function to the point where he got his pilot's license back and was flying again. And so I think about that and I think, oh my gosh, how many people are given that diagnosis of it's too late for you, we're just not, we're not going to be able to help you. And then they say the statistics and they say, well, because, most people over 75 don't recover from a stroke. Well, is it because they never get the same intervention? Not that everyone can recover that well, but why can't we give them the same intervention? And they're doing all kinds of studies now about the plasticity of the brain and its ability to reboot and to figure workarounds and all that stuff. Let's see. I'm going to have to hurry up here. I got kind of carried away. One of the things I like to think about is that if you look at young people with disabilities and the strategies that the disability movement has engaged to help them live fully, we need to do the exact same kinds of things. Just because you have some sort of a cognitive or a physical problem, why should it be different for you when you're 70 than it is for somebody who's 15? Look back 30 years ago, when kids were born with severe disabilities, they placed them in homes and they said, you're better off just putting them in the home because they'll never be able to live a normal life. What a tragic waste of human potential. And we didn't realize it at the time. Now we know. And I feel the same thing is happening with a lot of older adults. Again, you look at it now. I don't know, this boy on the left, he was a high school wrestler. He was with only arms above the elbows and legs above the knees, and yet he ended up being a high school varsity wrestler. Now, I'm sure when he was born, nobody said, put on his list that he could be a wrestler. But it was on his list, his own list. Kevin Conley from up in Helena. How many of you have heard of Kevin Conley? Anybody? Young man that was born with no legs, and he traveled all over the world on a skateboard by himself and took pictures of people reacting to him on his skateboard. And it's called Double Take. A wonderful book, really interesting about that, again, that perception that others have of you by seeing you. In some countries, people just assumed he was a beggar, so they'd throw money at him, give him money. Other cultures, they assumed he'd been injured in the war or bombs or something like that. So again, it depended on the social construct. They looked at him and they created that story based on what they believed in their culture. And we do the exact same thing with older adults, especially somebody who looks physically frail. A lot of times people make the assumption that they're deaf, that they have cognitive problems. They make assumptions based on social constructs. The potential for what we can experience and be and do grows exponentially because of the environment. I believe that with all my heart. Again, I asked the question, what if we all believed in not only a different possibility, but a different probability? How would we be living differently? How would we be providing care differently? And one of the things that I have been advocating for as I go around the country is telling a whole new story. Look at the longevity research. Look at the research on functional independence. Focus on resilience, because that's the key. I mean, you know it when you see it. People have it, you know it when you see it, but we've got to figure out ways to support it. Make it personally relevant. Okay, so when I say personally relevant, I mean, it's awesome. Jack LaLanne was an amazing specimen, no question about it. I mean, when he was 80 years old, he towed 80 rowboats, the person in each one across the English Channel swimming. I mean, it's like crazy. He showed us the potential of the human body to retain high levels of function well into there. But can most people relate to that? No? This is what people can relate to. So if you're trying to motivate people by showing them pictures of Jack LaLanne, but they can't really relate to that, then it's not really very helpful. It's not very personally relevant. So you're better off helping them relate to people like Hulda, who at 101 was still hiking the trails. Ben at 103, who decided he was going to live that long, you better get a personal trainer. Those are the people who look like real people. that's somebody can be connected to and feel like it's personally relevant to them. 91-year-old Ida, who was in the strength training study that I talked about at the nursing home, Hebrew Rehabilitation Center. There she is in her pearls and her heels, strength training. Those are the people that someone can relate to. Same with the longevity study. Framing physical activity and any of these strategies for well-being as not only an opportunity but a responsibility. And I think that's important. I think we need to get into that place where we're all self-responsible enough. We talk about healthcare costs going through the roof and all these kinds of things. And it grieves me when I go into senior living, and one of the problems that is now emerging in senior living is that the scooter salesmen have gone in and sold scooters to all these people. And so there's like this big parking lot of scooters outside of the dining hall. And you know there's probably 2 out of the 15 people with the scooters that really genuinely need the scooters, and God bless you if you need it, have it. But if you just have it because it's difficult to walk down the hall, you better walk down the hall. That to me, when people need to change that mindset, just because it's quote free, it's not free. You might as well go push your grandkid down and take their lunch money because somebody's paying for it. I mean, that we all have to do our part to be self-responsible. And I don't think that self-responsibility is a dirty word, because we all have to if you're going to point the finger at others, you better be responsible yourself, too. And you have to peel back those layers. Again, I'll use this example real quick because, again, it's so important, the language that we use and how we provide that information. When I took Cole to Harriet's house one day, he had a little T-shirt that said #1 draft pick. And she took one look at that and she said, well, I certainly hope not. And she was, as an 80-year-old, she was thinking the military service draft. Of course, in our generation, it's the NBA, the sports draft. But exact same message, delivered in the exact same way and perceived entirely differently because of your own personal beliefs. So you got to be aware of that. Another time I was in a senior living community and this guy was in there. He was lifting weights like crazy. He was doing like 35 repetitions of every machine. And I visited him for a little while. And finally I said to him, if you increase the strength to something you can only, or increase the weight to something you can only lift about 8 to 10 times, you'll have a lot better gains in strength. And he said, oh, at my age, I don't need all that bulk. Now, I said strength, but he heard bulk, okay? Again, just a different perception because based on what his idea was all from his experience. And so when you're talking to older women about exercise and lifting weights and doing all these things, you have to think about where they're coming from. I have to laugh at senior living communities that build these strength training rooms and they make it all beautiful and get them equipment and then they stand back and go, da-da, as if 85-year-old Elsie's going to walk by and go, cool, strength training equipment. I mean, it's just not going to happen. You have to help people bridge from where they're at to where they need to be. So, I'm going to skip through some of this. Going back to the big picture of creating that culture, one of the things that I see happen in senior living, and one of the things I'm advocating very strongly for in senior living, is what we call purpose-driven senior living. What if this is somebody who's not quite so resilient, yeah. Okay. What if senior living, instead of the job of senior living, if instead of people thought about it as a place to take care of elders, what if instead the job of senior living was to be a place where elders could have the support they needed to continue to grow and learn and contribute to the broader community? What if they, as a community, a senior living community, they identified a broader community problem like childhood obesity, and they worked together as a team to try to solve that problem? So maybe the community residents come up with the idea of having walking trails on the senior living property and inviting children to come up and be walking buddies to get more physical activity? What if instead of all the manicured lawns they grew organic vegetables for the local school children's lunches? What if, what if, what if? If you change your mindset about what people are capable of doing, then the whole world opens up. And that whole idea of I don't want to live in senior living, I believe most of that is because people want to feel like they have purpose. They want to give as well as receive. They want to feel they're of value to themselves and others. I think this kind of a thing could have a tremendous impact on that. I'm going to stop talking, and if you have any questions, please ask. Questions? I know, I'm running out of time, so. Anybody have a question, anything? I invite you to email me or go to my website and you can get a hold of me through there. I'd be happy to send you resources. There's all kinds of resources on the website designed to help move people from pre-contemplation, contemplation, all that. So you can look at that and see what you need. Thank you for inviting me here. I appreciate it. Have a safe journey home.
With Kay Van Norman's closing, we are closing this conference for this year.